And welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Dean Obeidallah, and today, very happy to have Judd Apatow with us. You know his films and laughed at them, from Trainwreck to The King of Staten Island to Knocked Up. He's got a new film out on Netflix called The Bubble, which is really funny. But we're here to talk about two newer projects. One is Sicker in the Head, More Conversations About Life and Comedy, a remarkable book, a follow-up to a bestseller, and a brand new documentary coming out on HBO in May, George Carlin's American Dream. It's two parts. It is remarkable. Judd, welcome back. You're the hardest working guy, man. You're just putting out a lot of work. You have a great work ethic. I'm not joking. Like, you really, is this right? Am I wrong? Am I getting, just you having to all be jammed together? Or is there
Well, I guess I tried to get through the pandemic with just very committed workaholism. That was my approach. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I was being normal, but I noticed when I was promoting The Bubble and then promoting Sicker in the Head and now the George Carlin documentary that maybe I was busy.
The book, where you interview filmmakers, a lot of comedy people, even Roger Daltrey, musician, and your documentary, on some level, I'm trying to find a common thread. And what I felt was like you were deconstructing both the art and the artist with George Carlin, and with your conversations, very open and honest. You share things about yourself. Is that what interests you? Am I getting it right?
I think that I'm probably in just some massive existential funk that I'm always trying to deal with. I think a lot of people, we create to try to understand life, to sort through things. And it's also a way to feel like you exist and to be part of the conversation and to be acknowledged. So there is a connection in a group of people who get through life by dissecting it and looking at what's working and what's not working. And am I happy? Am I not happy? What happened to me that made me so neurotic that I feel the need to do all this? Am I evolving or am I falling apart?
It's what I found really compelling. And the book is a follow-up to his first one, which was a bestseller. Very honest conversations with people. Some of them are older interviews, some are much more contemporary in the last year or two. I was drawn less to the comedy people because I come from a comedy world, because I'm more intrigued by Cameron Crowe and Lin-Manuel Miranda, and like how many years it took him to make Hamilton, and what, like, he talked about being on stage and looking out in the audience and seeing celebrities and wanting to know before he goes on stage that they're there, and these little things, you're like, wow. But I was more intrigued by the creative process, but so much of like, he's on stage and seeing the audience. It reminds me of my years as a stand-up comic, that your brain as a comic, and you're a comic too, when you're on stage, it's functioning very at high levels of multitasking, because you're doing a joke, you're often thinking about your next joke, where you're going to go, but you can't sleepwalk it. You got to connect to it, and you're looking at the audience at the same time. And I'm like, wow, this weird little connection with Lin and what he is doing. He's on stage. Were you amazed by the process or more the people? Was it a combination of things depending who you were talking to?
Well, I think on one level, I'm always trying to understand how people do it. So the interviews for me as a creative person are about, how do you do it? When do you write? What are you thinking about? Why do you talk about the things you talk about? How do you figure out the medium in which to express it? So when I think about someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda, I want to understand that whole process of Hamilton, but I also want to know how he's doing. Did the success slow you down or speed you up? Did it make you neurotic about being judged for the follow-ups? Obviously not, because he's been so productive since. But those issues of mental health and how we keep our shit together in the face of our own insecurities, trying to be successful, trying to not run out of gas. All of those issues are interesting to me, in addition to, how do you be funny? Why should we be funny? I mean, the world is such a mess right now. What is the place for comedy in it?
And, with Cameron Crowe, kind of odd, stuck in my brain. You said to him the line in the movie where Kate Hudson says, "You are home." And he goes, "That was ad lib." And I had just seen Almost Famous again, because it's on a loop on cable. I think it's like, I think I have a channel, like the Almost Famous channel. Like it's always on. And I there's certain scenes I love. Overall, I like the movie, but there's certain scenes I really love. And that just happened to be on, where the young guy is sitting there, who's Cameron Crowe, I guess, sort of, sitting next to Kate Hudson, and he goes, "I have to go home." And says, "You are home." And it was interesting you asked about that. Is there a reason that stuck with you?
I think it's, well, on one, it's the reason to improvise, right? Like I always think you want actors and actresses in the moment to be able to go with an instinct. So if they're obsessed with getting the words right, she won't say "you are home." You have to create the conditions for something new or something magical to happen. That was her instinct, which is, for whatever reason, the universe is telling me to tell you this. And that's the beauty of those creative moments. And I've seen it happen 1,000 times where somebody just says the perfect thing out of the blue and you can't believe it happened.
As a director, do you find that's part of the skill set you need? Like, people can say things, and if you don't get that it's great, it doesn't make it into the product. It doesn't make it in the movie. You're like, well, whatever. Is part of your unique skill set that you hear something and this innate quality that you're like, hey, that is special. I just know that's special, and my instincts have proven me right before.
That's part of why I direct, because I want to create spaces where people are trusted and they're part of the collaboration in a big way. They're helping create their characters. They're letting them grow. And so many of my favorite scenes suddenly blossomed. Maybe it was in a rehearsal. Maybe it was while we were shooting and someone said something. Maybe it was hilarious. Maybe it was heartbreaking. I remember when Paul Rudd and my wife, Leslie Mann, were shooting this scene in Knocked Up, and she's mad at him because he snuck out to watch Spider-Man with his friends without her. And she's crying and she goes, I like Spider-Man. And that's an improvisation. It was just a pure thing to say. Or even Leslie screaming, doorman, doorman, doorman. It's just, it happens because you trust people and you're hoping that all these connections suddenly pay off.
And you have a background in stand-up. You've done a lot of things, writing, but is this stand-up world where, to me, I love trial and error. I love giving a chance to the audience and going up with 4 punchlines to a joke and trying it over a few days. Or when I used to do comedy full-time in New York, doing 4 spots a night was kind of typical. And you try it. Do you come from that kind of background in terms of when you were directing?
I come from stand-up.
Right.
That's all I ever wanted to do. I didn't want to do anything but stand-up. I just started getting jobs in other areas and thought, oh, I guess I should follow, where the world is pulling me. But I do like the trial and error of jokes. It's fun. I just hosted the Directors Guild Awards. So it was funny watching everyone debate jokes and what's too mean and how do you do jokes at award ceremonies with celebrities there, because I had thought about it for months for my monologue. How do I entertain these people while making them feel happy and respected? And that process of working on the jokes and doing them at Largo and at comedy clubs and perfecting them is really fun. But I think it's more fun for me to allow something else to happen. I like when the train goes off the rails and something new suddenly reveals itself.
And you did the award show and you didn't get slapped once, which is great. I mean, it's great. The streak is broken.
But you could feel it. You could feel it in the room. Like they're there. They're like, hey, we had a rough couple of years and we want to have fun. And you feel that tension between goofing on people and trying to figure out what is the line in that space. And some people like to go really hard and they think that's the point of it. There's a roast aspect to it. And other people are like, I'm not here for a roast. I'm here to win an award and celebrate my business. And everyone has a different opinion about it, both the performers and the people in the crowd. Just like in comedy, some people like comedy really rough and some people like something more gentle.
I agree. So let's talk about the remarkable documentary, George Carlin's American Dream. There's a line in it where the title comes from. And Carlin says, the owners of this country know the truth, that it's called the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. Yeah. And I was like, wow. I'm like, oh my God. So when you hear that line, and it's in your documentary, so obviously you've seen it and thought about it, does it resonate with you?
It does, because it is a country that's supposed to be evolving. That's what they tell us. And that's why it's interesting, because you have these people who are like, no, we're only supposed to listen to the original documents and these originalists. It has to be exactly what they thought of in the 1700s. But that's not what the country was supposed to do. It was supposed to grow and evolve in thought. We were supposed to get smarter and treat each other better and adjust it as we went along. But it was a country created by slave owners and landowners who were trying to prevent a lot of people from having a say in how the country was run. So even though we were born a democracy, it was a democracy that kept a lot of people out of the democracy. And what are we seeing happening right now? There are a lot of people that are saying, we'd like some of these people not to vote who might not allow us to hold power. And let's figure out ways to discourage them from voting, because if we were a true democracy, then we would only be talking about having a national holiday where everyone can vote, and we make it as easy as possible for people to all legally vote. And we never have that conversation.
No, we'd have automatic voter registration. They wouldn't have that extra game where we're going to make it hard to register to vote now. They even go to the origin story of voting before you even get to the actual trying to cast your ballot. Some states do it, but they're blue states. That's the remarkable thing.
It's illegal to give someone a glass of water if they've been online for 7 hours in some states. In
Georgia. And that's wrong. Why? I mean, it's insane. They're banning books. Judd, they're banning books in 2022. Republicans are literally banning books. I don't know where we are as a nation right now. And Carlin, what an advocate for free speech. It comes up in the documentary. But I've got to say, and it's 2 parts on HBO. The first part is great, more of his story coming up, his evolution. The second one, you leave in the long bits, which I think is so important. And those jokes are relevant and resonate today as if they were written by a comedian today about the idea we're banning toy guns, but not real guns, talking about gun violence. I'm like, wow, what a great joke. Talking about forced birth by the Republicans. They only care about the fetus. Then when you're old enough to join the military, I'm like, boom. And some of these I remember and some I forgot, but when you put them together, is there any other comedian you can think of that he's been dead since 2008, that his jokes are still resonating, powerful, and could be told today and be funny and insightful these many years later? Anyone else like that you can think of through the modern era of stand-up?
I think the main person would be Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor has bits about police violence, and you listen to him now, they're too timely. I mean, they could have been written today in a way that makes you very sad. It's tragic that the bit applies today. And I think as someone who loves documentaries about comedians, it's always about not cutting the jokes too short. Because when you see these documentaries and they take an incredible routine and try to reduce it to 1/8 second line, they always ruin it. So a lot of our work is, how do we pace this out? How do we really get you a sense of what he was talking about? And I think that the reason why people are interested in George Carlin is because every time something happens in the country, he trends on Twitter because he has the best routine about almost every subject in modern political life.
What do you think he would react today watching this GOP that they've gone further than talking about banning abortion like he talked about? They're literally passing laws in Oklahoma just a couple of weeks ago that's challenging the court, but it bans abortion at day 1, forcing a woman who is raped to carry the fetus to term. And you've got them banning books and banning subjects from school like Black history or things about the LGBTQ community. How do you think Carlin would react to this? Because he didn't even see it. Like he didn't live through what we're living through right now.
Well, he has routines about how they want you uneducated. They want you to know just enough to run the machines, but not enough to ask hard questions. And that was the core of his beliefs, that of course they're banning books, because if you read the books, you will question how the country is set up and the power dynamics that hold people down. So it has to lead to burning books. The worst thing that could happen for certain interests in the country is that everyone was educated, that people understood how screwed over so many communities have been and continue to be.
And, famously, I think everyone knows George Carlin. If they don't, you'll see in the documentary the whole story, the 7 dirty words. And it makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's funny, I didn't realize it played on WBAI, which was the first place I ever hosted a radio show. Once a month, it was an Arab American comedy radio show years ago. It was like 2 years after 9/11. And someone's like, do you want to do this? And I did it with a friend. But this was, on some level, we talk about cancel culture. There was him getting arrested in Milwaukee for saying dirty words. And there was a case going to the Supreme Court about the 7 dirty words and what could be said, decency and indecency. How do you think Carlin would respond to what some people call as cancel culture, but where comedians are actually compelled to apologize for jokes that for some offend some, that if they're hateful, it's one thing, but I mean, just some people take it the wrong way and comedians are called out for it. Some are sort of canceled or have to at least apologize.
You know, he came from another era. So when he talked about a lot of this, he thought, well, just change the channel if you don't like it. That was what he said. He's like, just that's why you're allowed to change the channel. I think in a lot of culture now, though, things are pushed down your throat with algorithms. There's a lot that you wouldn't watch or you wouldn't hear or ever know about if an algorithm didn't force it in front of you. So he wasn't around in a time where algorithms could hypnotize people and change their minds. And that we understand the psychology of how your positions can be changed by the way you are fed information. So we're not sure what his opinion would be. I know that he felt like you're allowed to be a bad comedian. You're allowed to have bad thoughts, and that's okay. There's a great clip that goes around a lot of him talking about Andrew Dice Clay, and he had a lot of, I think, compassion and respect for Andrew Dice Clay, but he also thought that some of the material at that time was punching down. Mm-hmm. But yet he said, I would definitely defend his right to do it. He should be allowed to do it. And that, that's what I've always felt like. Comedians can be criticized. Nobody should be canceled. Everyone should be allowed to work, but occasionally we make mistakes. And not all comedy is for everybody. Some people want really dark, intense, nasty stuff, and some people don't. And that's okay. There should be places for people to see different types of comedy, the same way you might want to go see heavy metal and someone else would rather go see a country band.
It's true. And I loved his line about change the channel, that type of thing. And I subscribe to that. Although if a comedian is truly being hateful on purpose, they deserve every criticism they get. But it's the little things where comics go over whatever line people say, and you can tell it's not from hate. We're adults. We understand someone's being playful and it went too far. And that's a different scenario, I think, than the ones who are just hateful. But, you mentioned Richard Pryor. In the documentary, there's a clip of a young Richard Pryor and a young George Carlin on the set together with John Davidson, of all people. If people remember, when you see the documentary, you'll see this. But the evolution of Carlin wasn't just about comedy. It was him as a person. He evolved several times. Do you get a sense he was searching for who he was, or that he just, as he got older, he organically evolved and then it manifested in the way he looked, the way he talked, and then the subject matter he addressed?
Well, he came from a post-war America. He had an abusive father, so his mom took him and his older brother Patrick, who sadly just passed away last week, to upstate. He's amazing in the documentary. He's such a funny, wonderful person, and so he was 5 years older than George. George was 1 or less than 1, and their mom took them away because they thought they were in a dangerous situation. And he had this dream of being Danny Kaye. That was the original dream. And then I think he met people like Jack Burns and got more politically interested. And then as the 60s went on, he was kind of a corny comedian. And he slowly realized he couldn't say the things he wanted to say and had to take this big leap to grow his hair and curse and grow a beard and say, I'm not going to be someone that goes down easy, that plays by the rules and is very vanilla. And then he became a big star, but then he kind of got vanilla again. He kind of ran out of gas and he had a heart attack. And I think he just, lost the sense of who he was. But I think in the same way musicians do, people put out 3 or 4 great records and then like 3 or 4 terrible records. And then suddenly they find it again. And I think he saw Sam Kinison at some point and thought to himself, I don't want to be a corny comedian next to this guy. If this is the bar, I want to redefine who I am and go farther and get better. And it is funny that Sam Kinison was the person who lit a fire under his ass and he got competitive. And that was when he wrote those amazing specials at the end of his life.
And it is remarkable to see the honesty of what you have of George Carlin talking about that. The idea of seeing Sam Kinison and going, wow, and I've got to be better now because this new generation of comics and this is what they're doing. And I also love that you left a long bit of Sam Kinison in. It wasn't like one line. It was the whole thing with the U-Haul. And it was filmed like, I can see Dangerfields, even though it's closed down from where I live. And it was shot there years ago. And what I've found with Carlin in your book, the commonality again here, as we sort of wind down, is these comedians are driven. the artists are driven, but they're also fragile. Like there's insecurity underneath the surface when you're in this world. If you're in any world, there's probably some insecurity, but if you're a partner at a law firm, the insecurity is a little different. When you're in the arts, any day, because there was a great point where George Carlin had to pay the IRS, taking gigs like it seemed like he didn't want to do, and the IRS calling his manager on Tuesday after the weekend. So how did we do? I'm like, wow, like the IRS is a partner. And so, I mean, is it a fair assessment to say a lot of these people that in your book, Sicker in the Head and Carlin, were a mix of these two things of success, and they were adventurous and they were risk takers, but there was still an insecurity and a fragility underneath there that this might just end at any moment. I might have to go get a real job or be a failure, which is probably worse on some level.
That's the terrifying part about a creative life.
Yeah.
You got to keep it going. You know, I always say, if I have a hit movie, it doesn't mean the next one will be good. Every movie is an experiment. So when I start something and I think, oh, I'm going to make a movie about the pandemic. You know, when I made The Bubble for Netflix, I'm taking a huge leap, and nothing I've done before preps me for that. And then I go into the next one, and that one will not succeed because of what works in the bubble. And so you're always terrified. Will I have the next idea? Do I have anything left to say? Am I repeating myself? Am I becoming a bore? And some people do run out of gas. I mean, we've seen them where we go, oh, how come all the good stuff's in this 8-year period and nothing is good afterwards? And that's why I'm always impressed by people like George Carlin, who fight through that and stay current and edgy and interesting. And it really is about being engaged and passionate about what you're doing.
And I guess the lesson too from Carlin so much is to keep pushing yourself, and if you're going to reinvent yourself because it's organic, do it. And don't fear that. Don't stay in your comfort zone because you've had success if that's not true to who you want to be for the rest of your career. And the last thing, because I think Carlin really is like a philosopher. You know, in your book, you interview some people I know, like Rami Youssef, who I known for a long, since he's a kid, 19. And Hassan Minhaj, I know not as well, but I know Hassan. I've interviewed him several times where all three of us are Muslims. And what I find these younger guys, what I was impressed with them, not just their comedy, they're like philosophers on some level. When you talk to them, you know, especially Rami, he's like, I remember interviewing him, knowing him, but then interviewing him at 27 when the first year of Rami came out. We talked about representation and about what he wanted. I was so amazed at the maturity and the insightfulness of this. And what about you? You've interviewed both of them for your book. Am I alone in feeling that and going like, wow, these guys there's something very innately talented about them and their understanding of the world. I think Carlin had that as well.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, with the first book, it was a lot of people I interviewed when I was a kid, and that was certainly a very white, mainly Jewish comedy world. I talked to all the people that I looked up to growing up, people like Paul Reiser and Jerry Seinfeld and Leno and Howard Stern. And for this book, I thought it really should reflect the world right now. And people like Rami and Hassan, they're great storytellers. They are philosophers. They have to look at the world through this lens of their culture. So they're compassionate about their experience, and they're looking at how they're navigating the world, but they're also looking how other people are looking at them and how people are relating to them. And so they're seeing everything in both directions. And for people like them who are so kind and so brilliant, they just have a level of insight that other people don't have. They're very rare, special, important people at this moment, and riotously funny. Yeah. And I think very human. I mean, I did a talk in New York with Rami about the book, and we have a project we're working on together. And I couldn't be more impressed with his work and his approach to the work.
I agree with you. And so, Judd, thanks for being on Salon Talks again. The book, Sicker in the Head, I keep looking, it's right here on my desk. So that's why I look here, Sicker in the Head. The documentary, George Carlin's American Dream. It's 2-part. It's on HBO coming up in May. It is a remarkable story, and it is riveting. And I challenge people not to nod their head over and over going, oh my God, yeah. And it's from the 1980s or 1990s, some of the jokes, or early 2000s. Judd, thanks so much for being on Salon Talks. It's great chatting with you again.
Thank you. That was fun.